Okay, good morning, everyone. I think we'll go ahead and get started. Welcome to Camp Helen State Park. My name is Kim Wren. I'm the Assistant Director for the Apalachicola National Estuarine Research Reserve. I'm also the Reserve Stewardship Director. I oversee the management of the Northwest Florida Aquatic Reserves from Pensacola to Crystal River and the St. Joseph Bay State Buffer Preserve. So I'm here today because I'm the current chair of the PERT Steering Committee. And you must be here today because you have an interest in these valuable habitats, these estuarine ecosystems, and conserving, protecting, and restoring them. I'm excited to see the discussion that comes out of this meeting this morning. And I will go ahead now and introduce David Arnold. He's going to facilitate our workshop today. David is with the Florida Fish and Wildlife Conservation Commission. He has over 34 years of experience working in various state agency positions in Florida. He currently is the rulemaking consultant with the FWC and also trains staff in facilitation and stakeholder engagement while helping ensure that the meetings of the commissioners of FWC run effectively.
It's good to see some familiar faces out there. Had the opportunity to work with some of you guys over the years. Looking at the agenda, the way the day has been styled is give you some information to get started. What's this all about? What are some of the things that have been happening? And then here are some case study examples of how interacting with others in the estuaries of the Panhandle works and some of the lessons that are being learned. Then after lunch, we want to get some input from you guys. And the way we've designed that is not to sit here in the audience and have a conversation, but we're going to have some stations with flip charts for you to go around and give various information on those flip charts. And after we do that, we'll wrap up the end of the day, go over a few things, hear a few announcements, and then it'll be just wait until next time. I think it's important to stress this is about learning, exchanging, networking, sharing information. So we've designed some question and answer periods where you can ask the speakers some questions, get some answers hopefully. Again, we designed lunch to give you some interaction time. And of course, when you're walking around and filling out information on these charts, you'll be able to see what other people are writing. And it may give you some ideas that you can take home just from today alone that will be beneficial in the work that you're doing. So in the back of this room, we have two flip charts that are cleverly labeled pertinent needs in the region. And you really won't know what to write on that until after you've heard the discussion this morning. But we do want you to start thinking already about things in this region that PERT can help with, that you think are going to be things that will be really beneficial to hear about, to discuss, to understand. And just so at your leisure, after you kind of have gotten the primer on what PERT's all about, then you can put some information on those flip charts in the room as you have to get up and get an extra cup of coffee or get the bite to eat or go to the bathroom. Those will be up all the way through the day. You can fill them out at lunchtime. So any questions about the agenda or anything here on the facility that people need answered before you can have your meeting? All right.
So I am happy to introduce Kent Smith. Kent has worked with the Florida Fish and Wildlife Conservation Commission and its forerunner agencies for 29 years in aquatic habitat management programs. Kent was the habitat coordinator for the state's manatee recovery program for 12 years before leading the marine estuarine subsection within the aquatic habitat conservation and restoration section. Kent, I will turn it over to you. He's going to talk about the concept of the ERTs. What is an ERT?
What's an ERT?
What's an ERT?
Yeah. No, this is all good. Thank you. I can double team. Maybe I can get an echo. I think I've got this lapel. Can everybody hear me okay? I can usually project. I'm not a soft talker by any means. Most of my staff will, back me up on that. So let's see. I can use this, or I can use the machine, or I can use both. Right? The bottom. Okay. I'll give it a go. Right. So what I was asked to do to provide some background on kind of what we're trying to do with these teams is just kind of talk a little bit about what an ERT is. So an ERT is one of these regional estuarine restoration teams. They tend to be focused. Well, they all are focused in Florida on estuarine habitats, largely Oysters, coastal marsh, which includes mangroves, and will include mangroves more in this particular area as time progresses, and seagrasses. Those are pretty much the three that we're working on, right? The idea is to focus on something that is manageable instead of trying to maybe make this too large. It's real easy to kind of get sidetracked on a number of different issues, but the estuaries are where we're seeing all this, all of the, all of the waters funnel. And if you can get the hydrology right on the upland side, the estuaries generally try to take care of themselves and do a pretty good job. But our efforts are really focused in those areas. So what is an ERT? It's way beyond the terrestrial. It's really aquatic. And I gave this presentation at Ray, so it's really geared for about 12 minutes, but I have some examples at the end that will help a little bit. So it's really an informal group of practitioners, actual restoration practitioners, planning and implementing estuarine restoration on aquascape level, right? So we're working together to try to achieve, that broader view of what we're doing in the region for estuaries. Largely, there's a steering committee associated with these groups, and they usually are agency, NGO reps. But the group is designed to be kind of an open discussion group. Anybody can talk about anything you want. It's just kind of a safe zone, if you will, because the agencies aren't really overseeing. We're not in a position where you're getting someone from Tallahassee, well, outside of me, someone from Tallahassee coming in and saying, well, you have to do this or have to do that. You're not doing that. This is just an opportunity to start talking about the kind of work that you do. And that open discussion leads to sharing programmatic, expertise, right? We've got a lot of technical expertise in this room. People who are implementing restoration projects, people who know quite a bit about how to monitor those restoration projects, right? We know the ins and outs of contracting, right? We have our funding entities available, at the meetings as well. So it's great to be able to look over the melody and say, hey, how much do you have coming out of coastal this year? And is it something we could use on this particular project, right? So the key, too, is also to focus on restoration projects that aren't mandatorily regulated, right? You don't want to get into a position where you're talking about mitigation. And some of the other estuarine restoration teams in Florida, I'll mention a few of those as we go through the discussion today, have wrestled with that. You'll get folks that'll come in and say, wow, this would be a great group to be able to, pass a mitigation project by. Stay off of that, because trust me, that gets us into a whole different realm of consideration when we start dealing with a regulatory-based effort, per se. There is no authority in these groups distinct from the participating organizations. That's another thing that people like me coming to these meetings will try to do. When people start, if the group starts wanting to go in a direction where, hey, we need a PERT logo, or hey, we need something that really defines what PERT is, and then we really want to start approving projects and stuff. Oh, no, that's a no-no. This is really a platform for open discussion and sharing of ideas and implementing those. It's a great way to be able to put pieces together and make projects happen effectively. So within this, again, the steering committee tends to be a smaller group, but partners come from all different backgrounds. And at the NERT, for instance, we can talk about, let's see, one of these is probably nope, that didn't work, sorry. Top one. Okay, well, that makes sense. Yeah, I think that's where I was. That's where I was. I think we're good. Okay, so we even have, private entities basically in the NERT. So Costa is a good partner in that regard. Universities, we have foundations, NGOs, they're all there, and Brevard Zoo. Anybody who wants to be in there. Of course, the Army Corps is there, Sea Grant's at the table, and we have again a number of different smaller universities, private and public. So it's really good to be able to have these larger entities, or these larger groups of partners coming together in this way. In other words, really it's think tanks that provide collective experience, broader networking as a whole, to provide opportunities to leverage existing resources, provide this increased communication perspective, right? constructive feedback on different elements of the project that you're putting together, a more efficient use of the resources, the limited resources that we all have to share and can share. We get this great opportunity to solve problems on the front end of what we're trying to do, or maybe even kind of come back around if we need to and solve those, and providing this all together to create this regional scale planning and implementation of projects. So this larger perspective of what we're trying to do with the ERTs is really it's really a comprehensive one, but it's one that is a very informal one. Okay, it takes a lot of care and feeding to make it happen. So we've dedicated a lot of time from the state agency perspective to try to provide some leadership along these lines. And the steering committee that's formed for this is also, comprised of some of the feds and all who are doing the same. So that's pretty important. So the first ERT that came along was the NERT, and it covers this area from basically the St. Mary's River all the way down to Sebastian. Okay, the next one to form was a neighbor. They had so much success up here in this region that ESERT, the East Central Estuarine Restoration Team, was formed. And NERT's about, let's see, 2015, 2015. So we're probably about almost 8 years old on the NERT side. ESERT's about 4 years old at this point right now. PERT popped up pretty much last year. I think it was about that when we started talking, and this is the first opportunity to start recruiting members for the most part for that organization. And then we just started up this work, right? What do we have in the future? Maybe a big BERT, maybe we have a SOFLERT. That might work pretty well, but I think the SOFLERT's probably out because of what's going on with Everglades restoration. As far as the Northeast Restoration Team, PERT actually has some guidance, and I believe that the next speaker, Sir Darrell of the Panhandle, will actually be providing that to you. But it's quite similar to this. To create healthy, thriving estuarine habitats of sufficient quantity and quality throughout the region, and really looking at this regional aquascape, landscape level for restoration elements for coastal marsh, mangroves, oyster communities, whatever you're actually looking at. And this group actually doesn't have mangroves in there, I don't think, do we? Did we include it? Okay. I think we went back and forth on that because the concept of mangroves coming, is pertinent at this point right now. Pertinent. And then, so again, in the NERT's case, we have 10 steering committee members, representatives from NOAA, Fish and Wildlife Service, FWC, St. John's Water Management District, DEP, and one NGO. I think TNC sits on that one. And then we have these regional team heads for the North and South. It's such a broad region that we actually had to split that one up. I guess technically we could make two out of that, but this seems to work for the most part. There's one chair. So far in the NERT, it's been an FWC person who's been working in that regard, Annie Roddenberry, who you all may remember on the steering committee side came up and gave a presentation about ERTs at the time to kind of kick that off. And they, steering committee members can rotate over time. The dedicated coordinator is key. Again, that care and feeding is crucial. We have a fair number of calls, fair amount of exchange with the membership through online emails, Google Docs. Those things can work pretty well. And everybody operates by a consensus vote. All right, so if you really have to make a decision as to what to do, you can. If you would want to move forward with a project or whatever, you can vote on it if you want, or 3 or 4 individuals can go off to the side and say, we're going to work on this. You're the expert, right? So it works pretty well. The membership, there's no limit, no requirements on who can join or who can be part of the discussion group. It's an open door policy in general, so you have access to all the resources that are out there that the team provides. Agencies, as I mentioned before, agencies, state, feds, nonprofits, anybody who basically wants to come in, cities. We actually have a number of different county reps in the ESERT, county and city reps in the ESERT. So we have Brevard County, we have Palm Beach County, we have the city of, Hypoluxo, I think, is one of the cities that's joined. So if people want to do that, that's fine. We have fairly frequent meetings, three or so a year, to try to bring people together. And we try to plan those meetings that sync well with grant opportunities and with implementation of projects. So you might have something going for, and you're trying to plan some projects for a big oyster spat set in the spring. You want to have something probably this time of year. It works out pretty well. People are planning to do those types of work at that time of the year. It's not a group for approval or endorsement. That's key again. I'm going to keep hyping on that. This group doesn't necessarily come in and maintain some kind of list of, these are the NERT priorities or these are the research priorities for this particular period of time. Now, that being said, NERT does have a plan that has a list of projects in it, but they're not prioritized and they're not endorsed by NERT. They're just available so that people can look at those and can select from those potentially if funding becomes available. And then, of course, as I mentioned before, this online forum for sharing, for resource sharing. So one of the things that NERT did when we were standing the team up originally, we talked about the need for developing a guideline to actually how to put these restoration teams together. And CZM funding provided an opportunity, thank you, DP, for us to actually hire someone to come on and write a guidance plan for that particular purpose. And from that followed the NERT actual plan. We actually have a restoration plan for the region. And that plan outlines kind of, what the resources are in a given area. It talks about the different, how different organizations operate and how we operate together. And then it has a list of projects that are not approved but have been, vetted through the group, and they put them on there. They put a list of them on there. And those are updated on a regular basis. So examples of collaborative projects that we've run. Reconnection of impounded coastal marsh are really huge in the NERT and ESERT areas. And again, the reason those things have been successful is because we've worked with the cities, with the counties, with the ghosts that come into the room. Anybody is welcome, right? And they're much more effective when you're collaborating on the front end and throughout the project. Subsided marsh restoration in Merritt Island National Wildlife Refuge, another good example of that. Living shoreline creation, oyster shell recycling. So this is a huge issue, and I know it's an issue in this region, but over on the East Coast, they've actually branded this, and it's actually coming out with the Shuck and Share program. I'll talk a little bit in a second. Shoreline characterization, actually going out and looking at doing some of the projects, some of the upfront work that actually would be important to mapping where you're going to be able to implement a living shoreline. In this region, it might be more along the lines of developing an oyster suitability model for a specific estuary. Those kinds of things. Seagrass restoration, where they're doing a little bit of it over there, but they're looking at it more from augmenting systems with bivalves when they're doing the restoration. So that may be a promising kind of direction in the future. And then, of course, collaborating with groups on post-construction monitoring. Maybe FWC doesn't have the opportunity doesn't have the capacity to be able to do some post-construction monitoring, but someone at Northwest Florida College who's looking at doing a master's would love to come sweep in on the backside and use your project for some kind of a master's, monitoring effort. So making those opportunities available is part of what these groups do. Just an example of that shoreline monitoring project that I was telling you about. This was part of the monitoring that was done. They actually went up with kayaks that was very labor intensive, and they'd run transects. They'd actually look at the shoreline characteristics themselves. You had everything from natural shoreline that was eroding to stable natural shoreline, muds, and of course, areas where you would have to do some kind of a living shoreline augmentation. What happened for this shoreline project in the region was initially the St. John's Water Management District and DEP got together. From 2015 to 2016, they worked from Nassau all the way down to the northern portion of Volusia County, and they completed that project. And then there was interest from the next group. University of Central Florida and Brevard County did Brevard County waters, right? So there was a little gap right in here. Well, based on the work that was done here, we all knew what was going on. We knew it was helpful. And then FWC came in 2017 and 2018 and filled the gap. So kind of collaboratively working on these components, everyone says, oh, this is good stuff. You're getting a good product out of it. Let's see what we can put together. Having these fora is a way to be able to, fill in the gaps if you can and get more comprehensive information. Another good example of a collaborative project. This was one that we worked with. This was an FWC property, or is an FWC property. It's the New Smyrna Beach High School. The New Smyrna Beach High School doesn't exist anymore. They abandoned this site and actually gave it over to the state. So FWC took ownership of the property, and this is one of our eco centers. We're trying to develop a hatchery and an outreach area. LE can be housed here, but it's also a site where we can develop a restoration, showcase project. We can also have materials there that might be used for restoration efforts, whether it's recycled shell or coastal marsh grasses that you can harvest off the site. And we work collaboratively with the St. John's Water Management District, with NOAA, U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, and the county, Costa del Mar. We had about 10 partners that were involved in this. We were able to get some grant funds from the Fish and Wildlife Service, from NOAA and from Fish and Wildlife Service, and volunteer time from Costa and the local community, as well as some materials from the city of New Smyrna Beach. And we went ahead and restored a 5-acre section. So this is the track ran here. This is not what the remnant track. That's actually just a little habitat island that was put in there. But we opened this area up, actually created a tidal system in here, and then built a marsh basically out of this. You can't see it, the elevation doesn't show up, but all this material was piled up over here. This is actually called Mount Annie. So if anybody ever goes down there, you can go to the top of it. And there was some request not too long ago to put a mancala on the top of it, which is, I guess, some yoga thing or whatever. And they wanted to be able to do yoga and look at the Ponce Inlet light or something. So I don't know if that ever went through. I haven't been down in a bit. But the other thing that was cool here is we actually worked with NOAA to develop a series of living shoreline demonstration projects. You can see there's a kind of a hardened structure here. It's actually riprap with plants behind it. There's a seawall here that has plants and oysters in front, and then it grades over to an example of just a soft living shoreline with nothing but plants. But ultimately, this collaborative work led to, a real interest in the local community. We had over 600 hours of volunteer time out there actually planting marsh grasses. 25,000 plants went into this particular site. Very successful, very well attended, and this is what we ended up with. Okay, so this is about a year and a half ago. Right now, one of the problems that we're facing, if you want to call it a problem, is we're getting black mangroves kind of recruiting into these, and we're converting this over to a black mangrove community, which is kind of ironic. But we're able to harvest any of the plants that you need for a restoration project from this particular site in the region. So it's really become a focal area for folks. Great example of the kind of work that we can do. But you got a great living classroom here, right? All kinds of fish in here. You've got kids coming in. You've got the Marine Discovery Center that actually can use this location. You have an opportunity for science to be conducted here from the university perspective, and at a fairly broad scale. Good restoration science is being done here at this particular site, and you can also have a fair amount of fun. So we do have the MDC actually holds these duct tape boat efforts down there. They you can kayak from here. It's worked out really well. So a successful ERT. Remember I said again, no approval endorsement. I like to repeat certain things like this because this is a really critical issue. And at some point in time, this group will have, hey, ERT really needs to do, or PERT really needs to do X, Y, or Z. And I think the steering committee has that kind of, baby in there that they can't really chop off a leg and say, okay, yeah, we're going to do that. We don't want to see that if we can avoid that. It's multi-organizational leadership. It's not just one entity that's kind of providing kind of the direction on this. You may have one coordinator that just keeps the thing flowing over time, but you're going to have a number of different partners actually providing that leadership to keep it going. You'll have that clear direction from your steering committee. Your steering committee will be there. You can bounce ideas off them. If there's a group dynamic, you want to go in one direction or another, the steering committee can provide that. That's helpful. Open lines and means of communication, critical. Everybody needs to know what's going on, and it needs to be relatively easily accessible for everybody, and things move fairly smoothly. You want to see on-the-ground integrated projects, and that means grants, funding, match, resources, all applied, across the framework. So once you guys have been operating for a period of time, the kind of the systems check on this is to look back on the work that's being done in the area and saying, okay, well, PERT had a hand in putting X, Y, and Z together. If you don't get that, then is there a need for PERT? So you want to make sure that that's one of those things that's rolling from it. And largely I say that, but PERT will have its hands in a bunch of different things as you move forward in this collaborative context. Subgroups often spin off of these groups. ESERT has quite a few. There's a spoil island working group, there's a shellfish TAC, and there are others that may be needed, for whatever reason. You might have like a Pensacola Bay HSI group or something like that, Habitat Suitability Index modeling group for oysters or something along those lines. Shellfish are a huge issue in Brevard County, and that shellfish TAC is pretty important down there. So, but in the end, our whole goal is this: you want pretty habitat mosaics that are working well, everybody working nicely together. So that's an ERT. You guys have any questions?
Any questions after?
Okay, no worries.